Well, welcome to this special edition of the Added Time podcast, where I'm delighted to say I'm joined in the studio by none other than Kieran Maguire of the Price of Football podcast. And, well, I say half of the Price of Football podcast. Of course, Kevin is the other half. So welcome to the Added Time podcast, Kieran. We've been looking forward to getting you in here and to talk all things football finance.
Thanks very much, Alan. We go back a few years as well. Football finance has exploded, and rightly or wrongly, I seem to be caught in the middle of the explosion.
Yeah, I mean, we go back from Sky days, and when it first sort of started to be a story for the likes of Sky and other football sort of media, if you like, and as you say, it has exploded, hasn't it? And why do you think there's such a fascination in football finance with supporters these days? Because in my day, I didn't even know who the chairman was most of the time.
I think if you take a look at what's happened in football since the Premier League started, the acceleration of the money coming into the game has brought other people, and we've now got new owners, and we've got the rise of the celebrity sports lawyer. So there's far more stakeholders in football. The rewards of football have increased as far as players are concerned, also as far as clubs are concerned. Just look at the increase in transfer fees. So when you add a few zeros to something, people take a bit more interest. Then we've had the introduction of those people who, it sounds harsh, who have been able to buy titles. So, Jack Walker was accused of that in the Blackburn days, and then it all went quiet, and then Roman Abramovich came along, and then Sheikh Mansour came along, and financial fair play was introduced as a result of that. So people started to say there's some sort of narrative here, there's a story. And as a result of that, football finance has become more important. It used to be that the only thing you were interested in at the start of the season would be the fixture list and filling in your shoot cards and so on. I go back a long way for things like that. Yeah. Then we've had the rise of the football kit as being something big in football, and now when a football club announces its financial results, or when a club makes an announcement to the fan base to say, well, we can't sign any players and it's all the fault of somebody else, and therefore who are we going to scapegoat? Well, we scapegoat the Premier League, or we scapegoat UEFA, or we scapegoat FIFA, in terms of, well, it's these people introduced the rules, we didn't want them, and so on. And because I think as football fans, we consume the game 24/7. I often say to my wife, the first thing I think of when I wake up in the morning is my football club. And the last thing I think of at night before I go to sleep is my football club. Doesn't mean I don't love you, but I'm worried about injuries. And how am I going to get a ticket for the match on Saturday and so on? And it has become all-encompassing. And as a result of that, football finance is sitting as part of the broader discussion of the game. We've also seen some of the unusual financial transactions take place, which have provoked heated debate, and there's no right or wrong. It's whether, if my club has done it, it's okay. If anybody else's club has done it, it's wrong. Yes. And as a result of that, football finance is now part of the armoury of a football fan. You've cheated, finance. Who cares? If players cheat on the pitch every single match, but somehow we expect honour in the boardroom and from the accountants.
You've mentioned the words financial fair play, PSR as well. We it's called. And do you think that was? And with reflection now, with hindsight, do you think it was a sledgehammer to crack a nut in many ways?
I think there were vested interests as far as the introduction of cost control was concerned, and that's both on a UEFA level and at Premier League and EFL to a certain extent. If we go back 20 years, Manchester United used to win the Premier League every season unless Arsenal won it. So therefore we had a duopoly. And those two clubs always qualified for the Champions League, and I think we used to have a third club in the Champions League in those days as well. So it was all sort of fairly well ordered. And then Roman Abramovich arrived, and he became a disruptor. He, as David Dean said, he was firing £50 notes on a tank at my lawn, and players who previously, if they'd wanted to play at the elite end of the Premier League, they go to Manchester United or they go to Arsenal, and they would be rewarded. And the other clubs paid well as well, but you wanted to go to those clubs because they could offer you Champions League football, and players want to play at the very highest level. So now we had a third club competing for trophies. 3 years later, or 5 years later, Sheikh Mansour appears and does exactly the same to Manchester City. And I remember looking at, Manchester City managed to lose £198 million in a year. And all of a sudden, you started to see those clubs who felt that their position in the Champions League wasn't necessarily a right, but they really had to mess up to lose out on those positions. We now have 5 clubs competing for 3 or 4, and it became 4 positions as far as the Champions League is concerned. Spurs, I think, have done it organically and deserve credit. Liverpool have done it organically, deserve a lot of credit for that. So 6 into 4 doesn't go. What happens if somebody does exactly the same? What happens if somebody buys Newcastle or Aston Villa or Nottingham Forest, whoever these clubs, and that 6 into 4 becomes 7, 8, 9 into 4 because you've got rich owners? Those clubs who felt that they really didn't have to do that much to get into a Champions League place were starting to look nervously over their shoulder. So the rules were introduced, and nobody will always say this, but I can assure you there's old money fears new money more than anything else. Because we are the establishment, you should count yourself lucky that we're playing in your competition and so on.
Yeah.
So whilst they've never admitted it as much, the rules were there to stop another PSG being competitive, another Manchester City, another Chelsea. And that has actually been fairly successful if you take a look at the way that the Champions League places have been allocated, and also if you take a look at the clubs who have been in the very final stages of the Champions League itself. So it's there to act as a barrier. Has it improved the finances of clubs? A little bit, but not really. The clubs in the EFL, they're still losing 400 or 500 grand a week on a regular basis. Any other business, if I was paying £240 in wages, if I was running a nightclub, I was paying £240 in wages for every £100 I'm taking through the bar and through entrance fees, I'll just close it down. Yeah. So football and FFP, the thing about financial fair play, it was nothing to do with being fair. It's nothing to do with an equal level playing field. And UEFA, to their credit, admit that. And the profitability and sustainability rules have got nothing to do with profitability, and they have nothing to do with sustainability. So I think it is a misnomer. I have a lot of sympathy for Richard Masters because he is ultimately beholden to the clubs, and I think he would like to have a stricter set of rules, but the clubs don't want them.
Well, bearing all that in mind, I want to get onto a topic which I know is close to your heart, and that is sustainability of football clubs. And I think, quote, I don't want to quote you here as such, but and tell me if I'm wrong, but you feel as if there is a real concern over football clubs remaining sustainable.
I think we've,
with a capital S, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we've looked at the precipice on a number of occasions. At the same time, I think football is incredibly resilient, and it's got a series of safety nets because it's football. If we compare football to rugby union, we've lost Worcester Warriors, we've lost London Irish, we've lost Wasps as well. We've lost, I think, 1 or 2 other clubs. I think some club in Wales have got. So why is it happening in rugby and not in football? As far as the existence of a football club is concerned, and I saw what happened at Bury. I went up to a couple of the town hall meetings. I had discussions with an interested party who wanted to buy the club from the then owner, Steve Dale. And I saw the impact that the loss of the football club had on the town. First of all, the town split. We've now got factions involved as far, and that's not good within a fan base. The one thing I think which is beautiful about football, is that for that 90 minutes, it doesn't matter whether you're pro-Brexit or anti-Brexit or Reform or Labour, whatever it is.
You're all together.
You're Arsenal, you're Liverpool, you're Mansfield. And it is absolutely fantastic. And I went to a match at the weekend, and there was a late goal for my team. And this bloke who I'd never met before started hugging me. But when was the last time you hugged a stranger, Alan? So I think football is this fantastic force. Yes. And therefore it needs to be fought over and it needs to be protected. I think what's slightly different about football is that football clubs don't go bust, owners go bust, or owners lose interest. And we have seen this. And to date, we've had a long list of people willing to come in, or as a last resort, the fans will do something. They will set up a supporters society and they will have some form of fan takeover. But it's a very precarious position to be in. And I don't want anybody to go through what the Bury fans have gone through. I remember going up there a few months after the club had been lost, and a couple of the guys who I'd met sort of pre the expulsion and the destruction of Bury Football Club. I said, well, what's it like then? Because it's something you can't get your head around.
No.
And I think one of them expressed it really well. He says, you know what it's like at the weekend when there's an international break. And you feel somewhat lost. Yeah. And yes, you'll watch Sky Sports and you listen to Talk Sport, but you've got no skin in the game. Can you imagine that 52 Saturdays in a year? And I thought, that's not something I want to go through, because you can't transfer your allegiance. No. If the people that make my computers, if they go bust, I'm sorry. Nobody wants to see people go bust. Nobody wants. But I'll just get a different computer from somebody else.
Absolutely.
The
options aren't there, are they?
It's not. I'm not gonna rock up at Selhurst Park and say, half your kit's in a blue stripe, so I'll go and support Palace.
I'll be honest with you. I think if it was 1,000 clubs to choose from, that would probably be 1,001 anyway. Wouldn't
Yes,
it? But anyway,
yes.
In your case, but I was reporting on the night when Bury actually brought the news out on the night. That they'd been expelled from the league. I interviewed the then owner, who said to me, I'd never been to Bury. He actually said those words. And I remember I'd gone into some sort of daze, if you like, because I'm thinking, has he just said that he's never been to Bury? And this guy was, if I remember rightly, was a kind of, I don't know what the name is. There is a name and I can't think it. And an insolvency expert as such, and you sort of got the feeling that he was just using this club as a way of either making money or not making money or whatever he was trying to do. And of course, they're lurking around a lot of clubs. They seem to have gone away a little bit in recent years, but there was a time when there were people lurking around lower league clubs just waiting for that opportunity. Is that right?
That's right. I mean, bottom feeders as far, and these people are needed in many other industries, in the sense that they will pick up and sort of change things around. But if it was a retail store that was selling groceries and they wanted to change it to a travel agent, I don't really care. Yeah. You cannot change a football club into anything else. What I think is a big issue as far as football clubs is concerned is that if you take a look at the history of the game, many of them are central geographically in towns and cities. And therefore they become very valuable pieces of real estate. And some of the people who are the sharks in the football industry, or have tried to be the sharks, and we are still seeing this at lower levels, one or two divisions perhaps below that of the National League even, is that they'll come in, they'll drain the club very quickly, there's not enough people to protest, and all of a sudden destroy the stadium and put up something else. I'm a Brighton fan. Our owners sold the stadium for £6 million. That was in prime Hove. Hove's the posh part of the Brighton and Hove area. And then it was sold for £26 million a few weeks later. And you go, well, somebody's done very well out of that. Yeah. And now all of a sudden it's no longer a football ground, it's retail units. Yeah. And football I love, and I know you love football, Alan, but when I put on my business hat, I go, well, if I go to my local computer store or my local supermarket, it's open 364 days a year. Football clubs open 25, 30. So if you knock down the football stadium and you replace it with retail units, they're willing to pay more because they can be open and they can make that extra money. So for those reasons, the sustainability of the game and the protection of what we hold dear, because if I'm an Evertonian, Goodison is part of my identity, the new stadium is part of my identity, the shirt is part of my identity. And you have that pride and that sense of that civic essential part of the town and the city, because I often do, I get asked to do football quizzes and to write questions for them. And one of the questions I quite often ask is, what is the biggest town in the country which doesn't have a football club in the top 5 or 6 divisions? And it's Wakefield. And people go, Wakefield's not very big. I said, well, how do you know that? Well, it's not got a football club. Okay, here's the population of Wakefield. I go, wow, no, that's 3 times the size of Burnley.
Yeah.
So football gives an individual town or village, or it gives a megaphone to that club, and I think that can only be good for the town or city and the people involved, and ultimately the country. We are football mad in this country. I think it's one of the good things about it.
I mean, you talk about that vulnerability of football clubs, but I was interested this week when I saw that there was a possible winding up order coming at Sheffield Wednesday. But in my, I don't know, 25, 30 years of I can't remember when a football club was ever wound up. Absolutely wound up. Even Bury, I don't think, was actually wound up at the time. They were expelled from the league, but they weren't wound up. I mean, I don't know whether that subsequently happened. I can't remember now. But a judge, they sit in that particular court whose name escapes me in London, and they're very reluctant to wind up a football club. That's because of the community assets, I guess.
Well, it's not. I mean, to be fair, the judge has to apply the law. Now, if you have a winding up order, and I think our understanding when it comes to Sheffield Wednesday Football Club is that the winding up order is from HMRC because the football club has not paid the outstanding PAYE and VAT, probably in the region of £1 million. HMRC have an obligation towards you and I and everybody else listening to this as taxpayers, and we get that. The judge has to apply the law as judiciously as they can. But when you have a winding up order, there's 3 options. A, you can grant the winding up order, and that is curtains. Then a liquidator is appointed. They go in, they flog whatever it is to flog, and they give that money to HMRC and the other creditors. The problem we've got at Sheffield Wednesday is that the football club doesn't own Hillsborough. So what else has the liquidator got to sell? So that's one option. I think that's very remote, but it's as remote isn't the same as zero.
Yes, absolutely.
So you have to bear that in mind. The second option is that you get an adjournment. So the club owner goes in with their lawyers and they say, we hold our hands up. We've not paid the tax. Look, we've got a plan. We're going to pay you 200 grand a month, and we're going to keep up to date with the new payments. And we are 80% certain that the club will be sold within the rest of the calendar year, and the new owners will be able to deal with this. I've run out of money, and then it's up to the judge to determine whether or not they think that story is credible. And the third option, and we've seen this with quite a few clubs, Southend United were quite famous for it, is that they get a winding up order on a regular basis from HMRC, and the owner, Ron Martin, would beamingly smile at the gates of the court, and say, there it is, mate. And it just became a bit of a game. Yeah. So you can grant it, you can adjourn it, or you can effectively cancel it. So we're all hoping as football fans, and even when I speak to Sheffield United fans, they would say, I want Sheffield Wednesday to suffer on the pitch, but I'm in this city. Half of my mates are Wednesday fans. Yeah. Members of my family are Wednesday fans, and also I want bragging rights, and you can't have a rivalry without rivals.
A rival,
So even the Sheffield United fans that I speak to say, we're enjoying it, but that's as far as we want it to go. We want that. So I still feel very positive about Sheffield Wednesday, and you're absolutely right, Alan. We've not lost that many clubs. We lost Macclesfield Town.
Yes.
Again, that was owner issues.
Yes.
we've seen clubs go into administration, Wigan, Derby County, and so on. Coventry Stadium went into administration, and so on. And we're not in a similar position to where we were 20 years ago, following the collapse of ITV Digital, and before we had a sort of a decent policy for what happens when a club does go into admin, because there were some club owners, and we won't mention their names on camera, but there were some club owners who had worked out how to game the system. You know, we 3 matches to go, we're 10 points adrift, so therefore we're relegated. Put the club into administration, take a 15-point penalty. We're relegated, relegate. It doesn't matter how many. The fans don't care whether we finish 24th or 22nd. We're down, and then they would buy the club back from the administrator. And perhaps what people aren't familiar with is that the administrator only sells the assets of the clubs.
Yes.
So if that football club owed money to HMRC, tough. If it owed money to local suppliers, tough. If it owed money to a bank, tough. So what? We effectively start again with a clean sheet, and we just own the assets of the club. So that type of thing was a bit icky. And to be fair to the other clubs in the EFL, they rallied round and said, we don't think this is acceptable. It's not fair on those clubs which run themselves in a proper professional manner. We felt that the industry was suffering from a bad reputation as a consequence of that. So they have made the rules that much more punitive. And now, if you get to the last 6 weeks of the season and you go into administration, you get the points deduction next year to stop clubs from gaming the system. So that's where we are. I think somebody will always be found, but it's not guaranteed. And I think we have to consider ourselves to be incredibly lucky as football fans that there are still a long line of people who want to buy a football club for a myriad of reasons, many of which, from a business point of view, make no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, and we've talked about Sheffield Wednesday, and it's interesting to me. When he came in, I think there was a lot of Sheffield Wednesday fans who were delighted that Chansiri was coming in. And it led me to wonder, can a good owner become a bad owner? Things do change, don't they, during... I mean, I remember the Wigan situation a few years ago when I think the person who owned it had a tragedy back home in Bahrain, and all of a sudden lost interest for legitimate reasons, really. So, these so-called bad owners, it gives football this... People who are outside football will look and say, well, this is terrible the way these owners run. But they don't always start off with that intention. They start off with the right intentions. I mean, what's the solution to that? Because the EFL get blamed a lot for things. In many ways, the EFL are what the clubs make it.
Exactly.
And not only that, things change, as I say, and so it's a difficult situation, isn't it?
It is. If we take a look at Derby County, who went into administration, Mel Morris lost £200 million.
Yeah.
Now, it could be argued that he wasn't a Derby County football fan to begin with, and that accusation has been levelled at him. I'm not qualified to say whether or not, but he certainly put his money where his mouth is. And then, for whatever reason, and the Derby County one is a very complex one, he decided he'd had enough. In the case of Sheffield Wednesday, Chansiri has spent a fortune, and they reached the final of the Championship playoffs. If they'd won that match, we could be having a completely different conversation. So I think there are some rogue owners. I think you've got to give the EFL and the Premier League some credit for preventing those people from becoming actual owners. So as we're having this conversation, I know you're a passionate Evertonian.
Yeah.
Well, Josh Wander is now up on a charge for $500 million worth of fraud. Now, he was the preferred owner, the preferred bidder, as far as Mr. Mashiri was concerned, by all accounts. But I'm fully aware that the Premier League had done their background and were aware of potential shortcomings as far as his finances are concerned, and they put up a series of barriers which made it increasingly difficult for him to get through the quick and easy deal that he'd been hoping for. And as a result, we now have the Friedkin Group in control at Everton, and they are a much better credit risk. And the EFL did similar with a guy called Chris Kirchner at Derby County. He managed to convince quite a few people that he was the right person for the job, including the administrators. He is now in a much smaller room than this, which contains bars for windows, as a result of his behaviour. So football does attract rogues. If you take a look at the government, who recently put out their annual terrorism and money laundering report, and as a nerd, these are the types of documents that I read on a regular basis, and I was encouraged to read this by somebody in government. And for the sake of complete transparency, I've written 2 research papers for the government about the state of finances in football, and my aim is to be completely neutral, completely objective, no agendas. I look at it as the boring accountant, and I am a very boring accountant.
Keep selling this podcast.
And what we've seen in the most recent money laundering report is the football is seen as something which is at risk, something through which we can money launder, and that is a cause for concern. So having, again, some form of checks and balances within football to protect these rogues from entering the game, I think is really important. And it's a terrible thing to say they'll go off and find another industry to do it in, and that's not right as well, but it's not football. And as a football fan, because you have that unique bond with a football club, I think we fight that a little bit more hard as far as football is concerned, and ultimately that's a contributory factor to why we're going to end up with a football regulator, which in an ideal world shouldn't be needed.
We're going to come on to that in a minute. Just going back to the 777 thing, I mean, I remember it saying at the time when it first started, and there was all these stories, and listen, the type of journalism that is done is brilliant. I've absolutely no problem with that. As a journalist, that's not me. I allow people to speak, and they get judged by what they say and do. But I understand there's a need for that sort of investigative journalism. But I remember saying to people, just allow the process to take place. Allow the checks and balances that we've talked about to happen, and then you will find most of the time, that what will happen in the right way. And if someone can afford the football club, they will. If they can't, they won't. And I think that it was almost as you say, credit to the Premier League for allowing that process to go through and to making sure. And I get the feeling, and I might be wrong, that TFG were always going to be the owners of Everton Football Club. But again, fans went through. There was a lot of, I don't know whether it was scaremongering at the time. This club could go bankrupt tomorrow, and I just don't see. I remember covering the Hicks and Gillette story with Liverpool, and there was, I just don't see Liverpool going bust. I don't see Everton going bust. I think there will be pondering, and there will be posturing rather, and there will be, sort of 11th hourism, but I just don't see. There's too much involved, isn't there?
There's the potential upside is always so huge, and we've seen that with Fenway Sports Group coming in to Liverpool Football Club. They bought it for £300 million. They could sell it today for 10, 12 times as much. So I think those elements of it will always make it. And Liverpool fans and Everton fans would have fought and fought and fought to do something to preserve the clubs in their present form, in their present position, and their rightful position as Premier League, ever presence and so on. But it's the nearest thing to family that we've got that isn't family is football, and if you've got a relative, somebody that you're close to, somebody that you love, and they're on a life support machine, and the doctor says, I've done all I can, I'm confident, part of you still thinking, but what if that's not enough? And that's how we feel with football clubs. And there are times in my life when I wish I'd never fallen in love with football, but those are very much in the minority. And and again, I've supported a club which has been at that 11th hour, and we have lost our stadium, and we've been through the messes, and I've done things which probably get me put inside. But at the time, I'm going, well, that's the right thing to do. And I look back in a retrospect, saying, well, I really shouldn't have done that.
I mean, I remember, I must tell you, I remember sat in the back. I was over in Dallas on the day when FSG got the club. And I was summoned to the courthouse in Dallas Center, just up from Dealey Plaza, for a court hearing where Hicks and Gillette were trying to prevent what was going to happen in the court here in London. And it was a bizarre moment. I remember sitting at the back, and I was with one solitary Liverpool fan, who was an American Liverpool fan, who just kept woof woo, every time Liverpool were mentioned. And the judge stood up and said, "We're here to look at the case between FSG such and such and KOP Holdings." Which I'm thinking, well, I think you mean Cop Holdings, but anyway, that was America for you. And then of course, Tom Hicks lost the club, that day. I phoned up to ask him if he was still going to do the interview, which he gave me in no uncertain terms a reply that it wasn't going to happen. But thankfully, a couple of hours later, he rang me back and he calmed down, and then I was going in the car with him, because he then invited me to the Texas Rangers game, because he owned the Texas Rangers at the same time, bought it off George Bush, former president. And we're in the back of the car, we're driving up this motorway or freeway, whatever you want to call it, in America. And I said to him, "So what have you lost today, Tom?" And he said, "Well, I've lost 76 million and George has lost $76 million. I said, "All right." He said, "But that's not why I'm pissed, which means upset." Just for reference. And I said, "Well, why are you upset?" And he said, "Because it's the $4.5 billion I'm going to lose in 10, 15 years' time." Absolutely. And if ever there was a moment where I realised what football, and you think of the Glazers at that point, don't you? And you think of, a number of clubs. That was a moment which I thought, wow, we're in a different sphere now.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think the American owners in particular have realised that you can buy a football club very, very cheaply. That it isn't particularly good at marketing itself, because we're Liverpool, we're Manchester United, we're Chelsea. We don't do things like that, which is a football club. Yeah. And they've converted football into a broader part of the entertainment industry. And we have sanitised football, and we have gentrified football, and we've made football attractive to a much broader audience, much of which of that is to be applauded. But we've also made football attractive to a much wealthier audience. And if you get that right, then you can all of a sudden have a very successful deal in place. And for people that have no emotional attachment to football clubs, and I think many American owners come in with that mentality. I think some of them have been converted, by the way. Some of them go, "Well, no, I'm not going to sell this now. This is
us."
Yeah. But they see it as far cheaper than buying an NFL franchise. I think potentially we're going to be going for $10 billion clubs. Absolutely. Very, very shortly, if not already. It will be the same for the NBA and so on. And I think they feel that their showmanship, their ability to monetize and commercialize the game can add zeros onto their initial investment. And I understand where he's coming from.
And with that in mind, I think maybe 12 or 13 of the Premier League clubs are owned by Americans. Would you be concerned if that got to 14 under the current voting rights, if you like?
I've always tended to push back on this, because we're assuming that all Americans think the same. And you've only got to take a look at America. which is a somewhat
Yeah.
divided country at
You
present.
could say that.
To say well, that's not the case. They're not like the Borg from Star Trek and all got this hive mind and always vote together. I think what is unique about football and especially about the Premier League is that we've actually got. You're absolutely right to identify that we've got types of owner, and the American owners are most likely to be the profit maximizers, to be the commercial realists. But we also have those people that want to buy a football club because they want to win trophies. Because
Sheikh Mansour.
Mansour and Abramovich,
Yeah.
they didn't need to make money because they already have a degree
Absolutely.
of wealth. So therefore they're looking for something else. And then you've got the local lad or lass made good, Delia Smith, Matthew
Well,
Benham.
I was going to say, though, are the Mansours of this world like the new Dave Whelans and the new Jack Walkers?
Yeah, they
in some
are.
respects.
And I think it's because they're not locals.
Yes.
But they do have the same approach. Yeah, what did Jack Walker want to do? He'd been successful in his own right. He loved his local football club. He thought that I can buy success. And you're absolutely right. We've seen that replicated, and I think this causes the frustration for Newcastle fans and Villa fans because PIF, when PIF run out of money, we've all got a problem.
Yeah.
And if you take a look at Naz and Wes at Villa,
Yeah.
I think that Naz is the richest man in Egypt,
Yeah.
and Wes is, we'd all be happy to be a pound behind him as far as our bank accounts are concerned. So they are very successful, but they are restricted through the
So which owners do you want now, though? If your football club is in that position to be taken over, do you want an American owner? Do you want maybe a Sheikh Mansour to come in and say, well, or a PIF?
Well, they can't replicate the Abramovich and the Mansour. As a Brighton fan, I think I've got close to the perfect owner in the sense that Tony Bloom is rich by the standards of anybody else, but not rich by the standards of a Premier League owner. But he's also the local lad who understands what it's like. And the bizarre thing is that I can go to an away game, get on the train to go home to Brighton, and Tony Bloom's sitting on the train because he doesn't want to go because he sees himself as a fan. Sometimes he drives, sometimes he'll catch the train, and you go, this is absolutely crazy. So trying to get that mix, but I think educating and informing the owners as they come in to say, yes, this is your legal company that you own, but it's not a toy that you can play with and throw away when you get bored with. And having perhaps fan representation on the board can work at times. At other times, it doesn't work because all of a sudden it becomes a bit like Animal Farm, and which side is that fan representative now on? We have seen that historically. There is no perfect owner, but I think somebody who wants to achieve success, somebody that wants that football club to be part of the community. And we've just seen I've just read the press release from FSG say we've been here 15 years now, or however long it is, and we acknowledge we've made mistakes. The mistakes were pretty big, boys.
Yes.
Project Big Picture and Super League, the attempts of a domestic and a European coup of football, trying to take the word Liverpool and copyright it.
It was the Fairlow stuff, wasn't it? As well?
So. And I'll be honest, I had a degree of sympathy for football clubs during furlough.
Yes, yeah.
Because if banks can do it,
they're a business.
They're business, and they're losing money anyway. But then football has become politicised.
But they have shown, though, that they can. I think, in fairness to FSG, they have shown that they can learn and they're willing to listen at times. And because they know they've got possibly the most vociferous fan base in the league, probably. So they have to get it right in many respects. But you've just talked about politicising football. I remember going right back to the sort of 70s and 80s when, I don't know which presenter it was, said it on television, keep politics out of football. Well, we're on the cusp of putting politics very much into football with the regulator. Is this going to work, do you think?
It depends how you define success as far as the regulator is concerned. So again, for complete transparency, I've sat on all party parliamentary committees. I was part of the fan-led review, and on the back of that, Tracy Crouch asked me to write these reports in effect. And I keep in touch with people at the regulator. But as an academic, I want to do that at arm's length. I think the regulator can turn the dial down in terms of making it more difficult for the next Sheffield Wednesday or Derby or Wigan or Bury or Macclesfield Town. Can you turn that dial down to zero? No, you can't. Or if you do, you have a set of financial rules which are so restrictive that it will bake in the existing positions in the leagues, and the chances of a club getting into Europe or getting promoted from League Two through to the, think about the achievements of
like a
Luton Town. It's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. Wrexham, we're seeing Wrexham, aren't we?
Yeah. That ambition could be destroyed, and I don't think that's good for the game. It's not good for broadcasters. It's not good for media. It's not good ultimately for the owners, because the product becomes. Sounds harsh. Scottish football. Why? You've worked in broadcasting. Why is the value of the Scottish football TV rights so low?
Yeah.
Because 80% of the games are between clubs that nobody's got any interest in, and you've not got competitive balance and so on.
Yeah, you've got to have a dream, haven't you?
Yeah. And I think we still have that at the Premier League level, but the clubs are losing money. So if you bring in a more draconian rules, it will actually increase the gaps between rich and poor, reduce the chances of, we've seen Crystal Palace beat Liverpool this season. We've seen Brighton beat Manchester City this season. We've seen Bournemouth get into the top four. I think that's actually good for football. It's park the fact that I support one of those clubs. I think it's good for football in general. And I've watched the Premier League this season. I've watched an awful lot of games, and I thought, there's some sides which are good, but nobody's outstanding, and there's some clubs which aren't as good. But an awful lot of games I've started to watch, I thought, I don't know who's going to win this, and therefore I keep watching.
Yeah,
and that's good for everybody.
Yeah.
And we want to preserve that. As far as the regulator is concerned, if we take a look at the main areas that the regulator is going to deal with, is, I think, the easy win, and something which will get close to zero attention, is preservation of stadium, preservation of shirt, preservation of badge. Yeah. It's to stop another MK Dons, but B, and this is something which, whilst I thought was unlikely, was not impossible. Could I buy a club in London and relocate it to Dublin? Because, and that becomes part of the Premier League. Could Rangers and Celtic move down to English football? I think that preserve will now be more ring fence, which is good. But actually, it's a fairly easy win, and if it never happens in the future, it never happened in the past either. So how do you prove that the regulator will have made a difference? The second issue that the regulator is going to deal with is that topic we've just spoken about, Alan, in the sense of who we're going to allow to control our clubs. So certainly the regulator will have greater powers than those of the Premier League and the EFL. And the Premier League, which is opposed to the regulator, has been saying it's going to put people off buying Premier League. We didn't put Freaking Group off. It's not. No. We've got Bill Foley at Bournemouth. We've got Clear Lake and the regulator's been on the cards for a few years.
Yeah, but is that a bigger problem down the leagues? Because I've seen situations where there was some talk not long ago of football clubs, club owners. If you come in and buy an EFL club, for instance, League One or League Two, say, you've got to put money aside for 3 seasons. Now, there are a lot of owners in the Football League who just couldn't do that. And they're very good owners, but they couldn't sustain having this money sat in a bank somewhere just as a guarantee. So is that a problem, do you think?
Well, that isn't part of the the regulator's remit. The regulator's remit is, as far as owners are concerned, is do we have any reservations about where you're getting your money from, and do we have any reservations about what we think you're going to do with the money from the club? Now, as far as somebody coming in and wanting to spend a lot of money, my view is that if you come in with a business plan that roughly balances, or the level of losses are reasonable, I don't see why the regulator would get any more involved than the EFL. And the EFL say you've got to do two things. A, you've got to go and provide us with proof of funds as how you can buy the club. And B, we know what the club's budget is. Can you afford to run the club at this level of losses? Or if not, what are your plans?
Years, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah. And that's good. Yeah, I think the EFL have done a good job there, and the Premier League has done a good job there. I think the regulator can perhaps take that a little bit further. I've argued that if somebody wants to come in and be the next Mansour or be the next Abramovich, that's when you've got to say, well, if you want to come in and you want to transform the club and you want to overspend by £300 million, show us £300 million now. Right. And we'll put that into a bank account. And if you don't, and you're not that type of owner, it's not an issue. So I think it's how you organise
provision.
Yeah. So, and as far as the existing owners are concerned, what they are being asked to do, I think, is to prepare an annual budget, and some of them are grumbling about it. But I would argue that any person running a multi-million-pound business, if you don't have a budget for what you're going to do over the next 12 months, I wouldn't put you in charge of that business. So
certainly not a football club.
No, because football, something we established, is the preserve of so many people. So I don't see the owners and directors issue being huge. And again, I go back to this issue, which has gone under the radar in terms of money laundering. I know I did a presentation for, it was 3 years ago. It was for the National Crime Agency, Interpol, and Europol. And I was dead excited, Alan, because I got this invite from Interpol. I thought, Interpol, I'm going to Miami, I'm going to Marseille. They held this conference in Warrington.
Of course.
I was gutted, absolutely.
It's the centre of the world for Interpol situations.
It is. But when I was talking to some senior law enforcement agencies, I said, why the interest in football? And they said, well, on a UK level, it's two things: money laundering, and I know some clubs which I won't go into detail, which are involved in money laundering issues for people that you don't want to upset, and they do what we would call the pretendants. Now, you and I, growing up, we've both sort of probably looked at it from another point of view. They say, well, the club says there were 8,000 there. There's double that, and we know that there's dodgy, and we all know the stories about those turnstiles which aren't. They're doing that to avoid paying VAT, and
there's always been that accusation.
It's always been that, and it's part of football folklore. But on the other side, we've got some clubs which are deliberately overstating attendances, because if I've got an extra 1,000 people at £25 a pop, that's 25 grand. Every fortnight, which I can launder. So if I'm, and it's much more efficient than the alternatives, which are the vape shops and the nail bars and so on, where apparently these types of things take place. And I do this from having had conversations with senior law enforcement officials. So it is an issue, and that's at the lower end of the scale. At the other end of the scale, they said the areas we're most concerned about from international and global money laundering and global fraud is crypto, because nobody knows who owns it, fine art, and football. And I'm going, well, I've never thought that fine art and football go together again. He said, okay. And this guy said to me, okay, think about it. If I've got a painting, there's two things. First of all, it's really portable. So, and secondly, I don't know how much it's worth. How much is a Banksy worth? How much is a Damien Hirst piece of art worth? Is it worth £500,000 or is it worth £5 million? There's no price list. It's not like a computer. It's not like a can of beans. No. So it's the same with footballers. So you could have a footballer And again, please hope the audience aren't offended by this, but he says, if I've got a footballer in Bolivia or Colombia or Brazil or other places in South America, and that player comes across to Europe, is that player worth 4 million or 14 million or 24 million? Nobody knows.
We don't know as fans, do we?
We don't know.
We don't know.
And it's impossible for the government regulatory authorities. And they say, well, okay, so all of a sudden, let's just think about what's happening for this. Money is going from Europe to South America. Now, footballers are South America's biggest export, our second biggest export. What's South America's biggest export? And trying to get money from Europe to South America. So if I overpay for the footballer, does that money end up being... The simple answer is we don't know, but he said we are genuinely concerned about it. Right. And so it's these types of things where the regulator will have more power. So that's one other thing. The third part of the regulator is the issue of financial distribution.
Okay.
Now, if the Premier League was really serious about not having a regulator, it has had 4 years to go to the EFL and say, we're going to offer you a bit more money, not the 25% that you want, but I can assure you that there's plenty of EFL club owners who would settle for far less than that, but more than you've got at present. And we'll sign a deal that if our pie, the money we make from Sky and the international deals, if our pie gets bigger, you still get that 20%. And we're going to guarantee you that we're going to sign a 10-year deal. I can assure you the EFL would snap their hand off. And the EFL would also say, at present, we're in favour of the regulator because we're negotiating, but we've got nothing to negotiate with.
There's an impasse, isn't there, at the moment?
That's right. Yeah. And the Premier League clubs know that. Yeah. And they say, well, okay, if we don't offer them anything, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
Well, the only thing that the EFL have got to play with is the two-legged semi-final of the Carabao Cup. Because nobody wants it. No. It doesn't exist in anything else. So but that's the only negotiating chip that Rick Parry and Trevor Birch can use when they're in negotiations with the Premier League. From what I understand is that the Premier League have made offers and the offers have been fairly derisory. And as a consequence, we've had this. So if the Premier League was genuine about opposing the regulator, it's had the opportunity to make a better deal. The Premier League, the EFL sign up to the deal. The EFL's support of the regulator evaporates because we've got what we want ultimately.
Yes, of course,
and all of a sudden you've got the Premier League doesn't want a regulator, the EFL doesn't want a regulator, the National League has said doesn't want a regulator, but it tends to do what the Premier League tells it to. And you've got the FA, who should be the regulator.
Yes.
It's called the Football Association. And what an indictment of the Football Association that nobody takes it seriously, and it just focuses on the England team and not the England national men's team have done really well. Lionesses have done fantastically. There are huge issues with grassroots football where things could have done well. But the FA could have upped its game.
We've got to a place, haven't we, where I interviewed Peter Ridsdale just recently, where they're now coming up with plans of how they can generate more income, how can they can generate more. So it feels to me, and I don't speak for them, but it feels to me as if they've almost given up on knowing what they can get from the Premier League or whether they can get anything from the Premier League that would be attractive in any way, shape or form.
Well, they can't get anything unless they've got the regulator operating on their behalf. And if you take a look at the legislation, again, it's my job to go through it line by line, sentence by sentence and so on. What it says is that the regulator will have backstop powers.
Right.
And again, what the government wants and what the regulator wants is for the Premier League and the EFL to sort it out. And if you can't be adult about this, or if you're going to be spiteful and short-term and full of self-interest, which is the position of the Premier League, then we will step in. And I suspect that's why David Cogan, who has got a history of broadcasting rather than regulation, I suspect that's why he's been chosen as the chair of the regulator and why he's appointed as the chief executive, somebody who comes from a background of regulation itself. So I think there is a genuine fear that the Premier League is going to continue to prevaricate, to continue to delay, because if we push it down we get another 2 or 3 years before the deal was enforced. That's an extra 2 or 3 years of extra money, and the clubs do what's best for the clubs, not what's best for football.
Interesting. I mean, listen, we've talked about a lot, and I just want to finish on one more subject, and that is salary caps. Because it's come up again, and it feels as if I've been listening about salary caps for all my football career. When I say career in football, is it going to ever come in? Do you think? Would the PFA allow it? And some of the ideas of it. I mean, just from a manager's point of view, I hear that maybe one player can earn as much as he wants, and I mean, good luck with that one in the dressing room. Can you see it becoming a reality eventually?
Well, the proposal from some clubs is that we have a player cost cap, which will be 5 times the amount of the club that finishes bottom in the Premier League, as far as their broadcasting revenues are concerned. I think that's the really important thing. It's the broadcasting revenues only. And that will act as the ceiling. Now, if that was to be in isolation and we weren't having to worry about UEFA rules, I think that would be incredibly popular with Newcastle and Aston Villa and perhaps Forest as well, because those clubs can now pay the same wages as Liverpool and Manchester City, Manchester United, Chelsea, Arsenal, and so on. The PFA are opposed to it. Again, I do believe in being transparent. The PFA has set up its own business school. I'm the one academic that teaches on that business school. So I get to know Maheta, I get to talk to players as union reps and as my students as well. They are opposed to it because from the Premier League's point of view, some clubs feel that it's not competitive with clubs that aren't in the Premier League. I don't think that's a really very good argument. But from the players' representatives' point of view, from the union's point of view, there has been no discussion. And at present, there is an arrangement between the PFA and the individual leagues, because we have got a salary cap in League Two and in League One. That's been negotiated. It's when the EFL tried to impose a salary cap of 2.5 million in League One and 1.5 million in League Two, that the PFA said, "Well, hold on, you've not spoken to us yet."
That's right.
And that fell. Certainly, the Premier League the PFA have spoken to their legal briefs to say, if this does come through, what are you doing next Tuesday? A bit like that. And what we're also seeing is a very, very split Premier League itself. Manchester City and Manchester United, and I suspect Liverpool as well. So, well, hold on, the cap is based purely on TV money. We're really good at sponsorship deals. We're really good at our deals with Adidas and Nike and so on. Those are being completely disregarded. That's daft. So it certainly won't be a 20-0 decision or vote. I suspect that they will struggle to get 14 votes. I think it's going to be an interesting discussion. There will be lots of banging on the walls, not as much banging on the door and the walls as there would have been a couple of months ago, because I think we've had a couple of high-profile executives leave football clubs. But we'll wait to see the outcome of it. It's not needed. I can't see the benefits myself in introducing it. But some of the opposition makes no sense either.
Is it one, we talked about the American influence before, is it one which the American owners in the Premier League would favour rather than, because it happens, doesn't it, over in the States?
Manchester United are opposed to it. And Manchester United are American owned because they say, we're the most popular club in the world. So they would say.
So there are other reasons.
So again, it goes back to that, what we were saying earlier. This is why I'm not worried about 14 American owners. If we had 14 owners from a variety of countries, all they wanted to do was to make money, that's when I'm worried about football. I think some of the American owners are actually in it for the kicks, for want of a better phrase.
That's definitely an Americanism, if ever there was one. Kieran, I asked the question at the start of this, why are we so interested in football finance? I think you've answered that. It's been really interesting. I really do appreciate you coming on. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy the Added Time podcast, and we'll see you next time.